Go. Okay, so Shavua Tov, everybody. We are going to have a guest lecturer today, just to give you a little bit of a background where we were up to. We more or less finished last week the story of Micha's idol and his Chabad house and Dan's Shevet Dan, the tribe of Dan's foray into the north and their bad behavior in stealing Micha's idol. And at the end of the chapter, we had the bombshell that the Levi, who was really partly the villain of the piece, who did not cover himself in glory by really going with the highest bidder, turned out to be the grandson of none other than Moshe Rabbeinu. And we spent last week looking at the beginning of Parshat Yitro to see a possible reason why the grandchild of Moshe might have ended up as a priest to an house of idol worship, which is really quite a shocking thought. So that's what we finished up with last week. In my discussions about this issue with David Marks, he's done a lot of research and come up with some other ideas as to the reason for the suspended nun in Menashe that we looked at last week, and the concept of Moshe Rabbeinu's grandson being an idol worship priest. And he is going to share his thoughts with us today. He tells me that this shiur is not for the faint-hearted. It sounds to me like it'd be right up my street, with a bit of, possibly with a little bit of heresy in it. I'm still working hard to get on Mizrahi's list of heretics, so maybe this will help us. So this is a health warning now for anybody who feels that they can't handle this. Now is the time to look away. I'm going to unmute Leon because David has asked me, Leon, if you would read the English sources at the appropriate time. I said that I'm sure you would. I did send out the source sheet. Those of you who have managed to print it, I can see Johnny Halpin's got his. Those of you that didn't manage to print it, don't worry, because we're going to share the screen with you, so that the sources will be on the screen as well. So if you didn't manage to print it, don't worry about that. I am just going to hand over to David to introduce his presentation, and I'm going to get the source sheet ready. David, do you also want the text available of the chapter? Can't hear you. Unmute yourself, David.
Would help if how's that? Can you hear me? Okay?
We can hear you now. Okay, so I'm handing over to David now. David, let me know when you want me to share the screens. I will just get the chapter ready. I've got the source sheet ready. I'll get the chapter ready as well. So over to David. Paul, you just walked out for the second while I gave the health warning. The health warning is you got the health warning, Paul? Okay, good. I don't want you to say you weren't warned. Okay, so David, it's all yours. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Johnny, and thanks for the kind introduction. As a relative newcomer to this year, I think I joined it when I was in Bidud, when I arrived back in the country some time ago. And I mentioned to Johnny that his shiurim, particularly the Tanakh shiurim, have inspired me to go into Nach in greater depth. I love Johnny's approach. It's very much the kind of approach that no one would have learnt in Cheder, and probably not even in Yeshiva either. It's a very analytical approach. And I also love the way that everything is done in a modern parlance and trying to put things in modern perspective. And that's where we'll hopefully continue the same line this morning. So Johnny really shocked us last week. There was a bombshell in store. The actual suspended nun in our pasuk last week was a surprise to me because I'd never seen it inside. So I decided to do a little bit more investigation. First of all, to establish, is this the only place in the Tanakh where we see this unusual phenomenon, or is it unique to Shoftim Peret Yudchet? What's the background to this story, Micha? Who is this guy? And I'm going to prove to you he's got form as an idol worshipper and a person that encourages idol worship, and a real no-gooder for whom Shevet Dan is severely punished. We'll see back in the Torah where this guy Micha appears, admittedly not in the text of the Torah, it's in Torah Sheb'al Peh. We'll look at that. We'll discover why he was called Micha. We want to know, in fact, Paul asked us last week, right at the end of the shir, do we know exactly when this story happens? Yes, we do. What happens to this Yehonatan ben Gershon ben Moshe? What's his motivation for being the Kohen at the Chabad house? And what happens to him in the end? And do we find him elsewhere in Tanakh or anywhere else for that matter? Whilst we're on this journey, we'll be looking at subjects like what was the status of the marriage between Moshe and Zipporah that Johnny referred to last week, which is crucial to this story. Why Moshe's sons, and indeed Moshe himself, did Moshe ever act as a Kohen in the Midbar? There's a dispute about that, but we certainly don't find that his sons are Kohanim in the Midbar. Why is that? And we'll also look at the association between Shevet Dan, who we've seen over the course of the last few weeks, don't set a particularly good example for Klal Yisrael. What's their association with Avodat Zarah? Do we see this anywhere earlier? So I think we're going to start the story at the end by answering Paul's questions from last week. When did the story happen? And if you have a look at your source sheet on page 7, source number 29. And it's from yesterday's parasha, what we learned yesterday.
Can everybody see the screen? Is it on the screen there? Yeah? Okay, there you go.
Yes.
Source 29.
Okay, Leon, would you mind reading source 29 in English from yesterday's parasha? And by the way, as an introduction, these two pasukim at the beginning of a chapter are in the context of Avodat Zarah. The end of the previous chapter is a warning against Avodat Zarah, what will happen if Bnei Israel follow Avodat Zarah. And the second pasuk there, Kitolid Banim, which by the way was the first pasuk of the Kriyat HaTorah for Tisha B'Av morning, is a prophecy of Bnei Israel getting involved in idol worship and what will happen to them. So Leon, over to you.
For the Lord your God is a consuming fire, an impassioned God. When you have begotten children and children's children and are long established in the land, should you act wickedly and make for yourselves a sculptured image in any likeness, causing the Lord your God displeasure and vexation?
Okay, and if we now look at the Balatorim. Now, I'll explain it because a lot of what I'm going to be showing you this morning is from the Balatorim. The Balatorim is a very well-known halachist from the end of the 13th, beginning of 14th century. Born in Germany, in Cologne. His father is a very, very famous halachist, the Rosh. He writes a brilliant commentary on the Talmud, and his son follows him in his footsteps as being a brilliant Talmudist. Family moves to Provence, and then later the Balatorim, Yaakov ben Asher is his name, moves to Toledo. And it's likely he tried making his way to Eretz Israel. Anyway, the Torah is famous for a commentary, a halachic commentary on which is called the Arba Atzurim, which Johnny probably studied for his Micha. And the Shulchan Aruch, Yosef Karo's great work, is based considerably on the work of the Torah, the Arba Atzurim. He's less known for his commentary on the Torah, the Balatorim. And the Balatorim...
David, can I just interrupt you for 1 second there? Just as a matter of interest, I didn't know that the Balaturim's name was Yaakov ben Asher. My name is Yaakov Tzvi ben Asher Chaim.
Wow. Wow.
Maybe I'm a Gilgul of the Balaturim, who knows?
Okay. And did you study the
Yes, I did. Yes, the tour. Yes, that was part of it.
Very, very appropriate then. Now, Balaturim is fascinating on two scores. Number one, if you're familiar with the concept of gematrias, i.e. turning words into numbers and gaining something from the gematria. Prime example, the word tzitzit. You take the letters of the word tzitzit, I'm not going to go into detail, comes to 600. You add the 8 strings of the tzitzit and the 5 knots of the tzitzit, 613. So the Balaturim will tell you that this 613 is the way Uri'item Otah, this is the way of fulfilling the mitzvah of Uri'item Otah by having 613. Okay, that's one of the things that we find in the commentary of the Balatorim. The second thing is that he will source various midrashim that are either not known to us or are very, very rare. So he's going to be critical in this presentation this morning. So here's a very simple thing that's going to date our story. Ramaz, says the Balatorim, La'acha kuf yud shanim. See the word ki, kuf yud, kuf is 20. Sorry, chaf yud. Chaf is 20, yud is 10. So chaf yud shanim acharei motah, after Moshe's death, ya'avdu akum, they will worship idols. And what specifically? Pesel Micha. Now, Johnny told us last week, he's dated the story based on the Seder Olam and also on the Radak. He says that our story doesn't belong where it's printed at the end of Sefer Shoftim. It's at the beginning of Sefer Shoftim, the time period at the beginning of Sefer Shoftim. Why is it put at the end of Sefer Shoftim? My theory is that it's to do with Shevet Dan, and therefore it follows on from the story of Shimshon. And the author of Sefer Shoftim, Shmuel, is emphasizing the fact of what a rotten lot Shevet Dan were, and why, as we saw in the Pesukim, everyone did what they want. There was no rulership in Israel at the time. There was total anarchy. So now look at number 30, source 30, Leon.
Well, I know how defiant and stiff-necked you are, even now, while I am still alive in your midst. You have been defiant toward the Lord. How much more then when I am dead?
Okay, and this is a quotation from the Sedra Vayelech, which was Moshe's speech on the day of his death. And Moshe is predicting how stiff-necked and defiant the people are. And look at the Balaturim's comment on these words, V'yafki acharei moti. Kaf Yud Shanim Acharei Moti, 30 years after I've died. How do we calculate it? Yehoshua Parnesit Yisrael Kaf Chet Shana, that Yehoshua ruled over or sustained Israel for 28 years. Ubet Shanim Herichu Hazakenim, and after Yoshua's death, you had the Zakenim. So 28 plus 2 is 30. Therefore, we can establish through this Balatorim that the story of Micha's idol took place only 30 years after Moshe's death. And therefore, it fits in that his grandson could theoretically have been alive to be the Kohen at the Chabad house of Micha. Okay, so that answers Paul's first question. Let's look at Paul's second question now. Do we know anything more about this guy, Yehonatan? And what's his motivation? And what happens to him in the end? So again, we're looking towards the end of the presentation. Have a look, please, at source number 25. This is from Divrei Hayamim. It's very much a historical document. Leon, would you like to read source 25 for us, please?
The sons of Amram, Aaron and Moses. Aaron was set apart, he and his sons, forever, to be consecrated as most holy, to make burnt offerings to the Lord, and serve him and pronounce blessings in his name forever. As for Moses, the man of God, his sons were named after the tribe of Levi. The sons of Moses, Gershom and Eleazar. The sons of Gershom, Shebuel the chief. And the sons of Eleazar were Rehabiah the chief. Eleazar had no other sons, but the sons of Rehabiah were very numerous.
Okay, so I thought the name of the son of Moshe, the name of Gershon's son was Yehonatan, but now he's called Shevuel. And have a look at the next source, 26. Leon, please.
Shevuel, son of Gershom, son of Moses, was the chief officer over the treasuries.
Okay, so is this the same person as Yehonatan ben Gershom ben Moshe? So we look now at source 27, which will hopefully answer Paul's second question. This is from the Jerusalem Talmud, Brachot, which gives a little bit of a history lesson about Yehonatan, tells us what his motivations are, and will tell us eventually what happens to him. I don't think we're going to have time to go through the whole source, so I'll briefly paraphrase what's in the Gemara. If you just go up again a sec, Johnny, please.
But is it so from there?
Sorry, that's it, thank you.
Yeah.
So you can see there in the first line, Vihonatan ben Gershom ben Menashe nun talui. This letter nun is suspended. Im Zacha ben Moshe. If he's a good guy, then he's a ben Moshe. Ve'im lav ben Menashe. When he acts evilly, then he's considered as a son of Manasseh. And again, Johnny told us last week about who this guy Manasseh was. Generations later, probably the most wicked person, the most wicked king in Jewish history, who unfortunately reigned for 55 years and was one of the main causes of the Churban Beit Rishon, which we commemorated and mourned over last week. So, that now has explained the nun. Let
me just show you, just remind everybody of the nun. If you just give me a sec, I'll just show you the nun again. Here we go. There, can you see that on the screen now? There's the nun, which is suspended in the name of Yehonatan ben Gershom ben Menashe, and the nun is suspended there. We take the nun away, we're left with Moshe.
Okay, and Johnny's explanation, which is the explanation we're going to find in the Bavli shortly, is in order to hide Moshe's shame, to not put him in shame in public, the letter Nun was added to disassociate his grandson from him. Okay, so going further in this Gemara, if this guy Yehonatan or Shavuel, we don't know yet if he's Yehonatan or Shavuel, if he's sometimes good, sometimes bad, how does it come that he lives for such a long time? And we'll see how long in a minute. And the answer given in the Gemara is that he was very stingy with his idol. What does that mean? When he was acting at this Chabad house, he actually told the people who were coming up to him, don't give me a lot of money towards this idol. You're buying eggs and flour and all this to make korbanot, menachot, to this idol. But I'm telling you, this idol hasn't got any hands, hasn't got any feet, it can't speak, it can't do anything. Quite frankly, guys, you're wasting your money. So he was honest enough to say that the idol worship was of little or no value. But however, he still did this for a living because it was making him money. That was his motivation. We see he lives for a long time because he ends up being the treasurer to David HaMelech. In item 26, Shavuel, the son of Gershom, the son of Moses, was the chief officer over the treasuries. So again, this guy's mentioned as Shavuel. So back to the Gemara below, the answer to why his name is changed from Yehonatan to Shavuel is given. When David HaMelech becomes the king, he finds this guy Yehonatan. He sees he's good with money. He's either a financial advisor or a trickster or one and the same. And David HaMelech decides to put this guy Yehonatan in charge of the treasury. And as a result, his name is changed from Yehonatan to Shavuel. Why Shavuel? Shav Lekael. He returns to Hashem. He does teshuvah. Similarly, if you remember from, I think, the first year that Johnny gave on this subject, in the beginning of the story, we've sometimes called Micha, and sometimes he's called Michael. Sometimes he's a dirty, rotten scoundrel, and at other times, he's got God's name attached to him. So very, very similar to what happens to Yonatan. So David HaMelech, according to this Gemara, puts him in charge of the treasury. And then David HaMelech asks this guy, look, I know you're the grandson of Moshe Rabbeinu. What turned you to Avodat Zarah? I can't believe that a grandson of Moshe Rabbeinu would get involved in Avodat Zarah. And he turns around to David HaMelech and says, the motivation for me was purely money. Nothing more. And I learned something from my grandfather. My grandfather said, rather than doing nothing, being a parasite, relying on the state for handouts, it's better to be involved in Avodat Zarah. And David HaMelech turns around and says, that's not possible. That's not what your grandfather meant. Your grandfather meant by Avodat Zarah menial work that is Zarah, that is strange to you. And therefore, rather than relying on handouts or going to the job exchange, you have to do menial work. That's what your grandfather taught you. So anyway, after David sees that he loves money, he heads him up in charge of his treasury. And look in the block letters, Shavuel. Why is it called Shavuel? Sheshav El Kel b'chol libo u'b'chol kocho. He returns to Hashem with all his heart and with all his might. But when David HaMelech dies, his son Shlomo appoints someone else as the chief treasurer. And according to this Gemara, he goes back to his former self of being a crook. But we still see, if he lived all the way to the rule of Shlomo HaMelech, he must have been a very, very old man. So the Gemara there ends with Chazal Kilkulo Harishon. He returns to his former trade, being a ganef, being a thief, being someone who's taking money for Avodat Zarah. Okay, so that answers Paul's questions.
Just before you carry on there, just to put some figures on it, David HaMelech, if we say that this took place straight after the time of Yehoshua, 2 years after Yehoshua's death, that means that he and David HaMelech lived around about between 350 and 400 years after Yehoshua, which means that this Yehonatan or Shmuel would have been at least 400 years old, according to this Gemara.
And it does stretch the imagination. I agree with that, Johnny.
This is Sharon. May I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
And if it's premature, just either put it off or don't answer it, please. In my studies of Gemara, particularly Bavli, we often thought that the questions being discussed were really, they appeared to be for clarification of a line of Torah or Tanakh. Yeah. But often the sages were actually, in a veiled way, addressing a sociological or halachic or anthropological question that was facing them in their own diaspora or in their own circles of community. Yeah. Was this possibly being done as an anachronism in order to answer some other sort of question that was being wrestled with at the time of the Jerusalem Talmud?
What? Why the Haredim don't work and rely on handouts from the state?
That wasn't what I meant.
Very good point.
I was back in Tiberias, but we can be right here in Netanya.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's very, very credible. Johnny, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the concept that Yehonatan ben Gershom ben Moshe was 400 years old and was the treasurer of David HaMelech, as you said, stretches the imagination. Personally, as a super rationalist, I don't buy that for one moment. But I do believe that what Sharon is saying is correct, and I do believe that what the Gemara is trying to teach us here is that we have a person who has a background, a solid background. His head is turned by a desire for money. He is able to do teshuvah, and sadly he returns back to his original bad behavior. And I think this is what we're meant to learn from this Gemara, is not to take it literally that Shmuel or Yehonatan was 400 years old and looked after the treasury of David HaMelech. It's a story which we're meant to take a message from, which is clearly that if your head is turned by money, then that is a very dangerous situation. Even if you have a very solid background, and there doesn't come any more solid background of being a grandson of Moshe Rabbeinu. So that's how I understand that. I don't get too hung up on the actual historical aspect of it, because clearly nobody lived till 400 years of age, even back in those days. That's my take on it.
Can I say something very briefly? It also shows the story of who you associate with, because if you're with the right person, David HaMelech was able to encourage him to live the right way and do the right thing. If you are not associated with a good person or people in the right mindset, you're likely to wander and go off on your own. Sorry.
Okay. This is a really crucial point, and something that Johnny was mentioning last week, as to how someone like this Yehonatan could have been turned. What was his background? And this is where we're moving towards. So let's move on, if that's okay with everyone. The suspended letter nun, is it a unique phenomenon? No. It occurs in three other places in Tanakh. I'm not going to bore you with them because they've got, unfortunately, absolutely no connection with our passage whatsoever. One of them appears in chapter 80 of Tehillim, and the Gemara in Kiddushin says the letter there is suspended to show that the word it's in is the halfway point of Sefer Tehillim. The other two are in the same chapter in the book of Eov, maybe a slight association with our passage because the word, the suspended letter is an ayin on the word Risha'im, evil people, but I'm not going to read anything into that. Okay, let's move on to source number 29, which is, who was Micha? Has this guy got form? Sorry, it's not 29. It's number 18, Johnny, thank you. Has this guy got form, and why is he called Micha? And this is something I remember learning a long, long time ago. Okay, and this is what actually brought me into the Balatorim, because I remember learning about Pesel Micha from the Balatorim some time ago. So this is one of the key passages dealing with Pesel Micha, the source of Pesel Micha. Set the story. Moshe has just killed the Egyptian taskmaster. He goes out the next day to discover two Jewish men, Datan and Aviram, fighting. It comes out that they know what Moshe has done with the taskmaster. He knows he's liable for the death penalty. So Leon, if you'd just like to read that for us, please.
When Pharaoh learned of the matter, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh. He arrived in the land of Midian and sat down beside a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. But shepherds came and drove them off. Moses rose to their defense and he watered their flock. When they returned to their father, Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come back so soon today?" They answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Where is he then? Why did you leave the man? Ask him in to break bread." Moses consented to stay with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah as wife. She bore a son, whom he named Gershom, for he said, "I have been a stranger in a foreign land."
Thanks, Leon. And I've highlighted 2 words or phrases. I've highlighted the word ulechohen, first of all. And look at source 19. Says the Balatorim, who we've talked about before, the formation of this word, kohen, you'll find many, many times in the Torah and Tanakh, ha-kohen, but ulechohen, with the Vav and the Lamed in front, only appears 3 times in the whole of Tanakh. Here, and 2 places in the story of Pesel Micha. Therefore, there's got to be a connection between these 2 stories. Where does it appear? Kativ la'av u'lechohen, Yitro haya komer la'avodat elilim. Yitro was a priest to idol worship. Ucheshenasa Moshe bito, when he allowed Moses to marry his daughter, Hutzrach Moshe lindolo, sheben harishon sheyulad lo, sheyeh komer la'avodat elilim. There was a condition placed to this marriage that, think about it, we have the concept of mixed marriages. Many jokes we have of a Jew married to a Catholic, and they come to a compromise. Say, okay, we'll bring up one child according to your religion and one child according to my religion. This is what, according to the Balatorim, went on here. And what was Moshe's motivation? Because he thought by doing that, by allowing to this condition, that he would bring his father-in-law close to Hashem and bring him to convert. And we know that Yitro does convert. However, in line 3 of the Balatorim, it says that Mikol Makom Ne'enash, Moshe was punished. Sheben beno na'aseh komer la'avodat elilim. That his grandson, because he got into this covenant with his father-in-law, his grandson would end up being a priest to idolatry. Shenema v'Honatan ben Gershom ben Menashe, as we've got. V'darshu Chazal, that should be, I've missed a couple of letters there. Sheben Moshe Haya Ela Shetulin Haklala Bim Kolel. This is an expression from the Gemara which says that you hang a person on a peg according to his cloth. So in other words, if he's descended from evil, from idol worship, that's how his name will be hung. Hence the explanation of this suspended nun. So if he's going to be like Moshe, then we'll leave the nun out. But if he's going to be involved in Avodat Zarah, then we need to suspend this letter by this word by the nun. Okay. Now have a look again in the text that Leon just read. There's an important word that I highlighted in the Hebrew. In verse 21, Vayoel Moshe lashevet et ha'ish. We have the same expression, Vayoel, in the passages that we've learned with Johnny. And one of the explanations of Vayoel is to sojourn with someone. But there's another explanation of Vayoel, another meaning of Vayoel. The word Allah, we find this in the Sidrot of Kitavor and Nitzavim. And there it refers to an oath. Therefore, it appears that Moshe and Yitro, his father-in-law, have a signed written agreement, an oath between them, that the first son will follow his religion and any children born thereafter will follow Moshe's religion. And as a result, Moshe is severely punished.
David?
I find this very, very disturbing.
David?
Yeah.
If that's true about the first son, why was he circumcised by Zipporah?
Okay, we're coming on to that. Very good. So we can also ask, Paul.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, Paul, because what it does explain, perhaps, is why he wasn't circumcised in the first place.
Exactly. All right, we're coming there, Johnny. That's going to be one of my bombshells. So let's first of all ask ourselves a question. What was the basis that allowed Moshe to marry Zipporah in the first place? How could Moshe, the future leader of Klal Yisrael. He's just met Hashem on at the burning bush. Sorry, he's just about to meet Hashem at the burning bush. That's crucial. Before he first meets God, how's he, the future leader of the Jewish people, allowed to worship not just any old non-Jewess, but this particular one? Anyone got any thoughts on that?
My thought is that Moshe recognized Yitro or Ruel as a man of profound wisdom, despite his way of observing his relationship to God or the spiritual world. That this was a man who was a leader and a guide and had a good sense of organization of thoughts, and Moses needed that. He had grown up spoiled in a palace. He really didn't know his family. He didn't know his own tradition. He knew his people, but not his own traditions. And this man had a great deal to offer him, wisdom and hospitality both, as well as probably a beautiful daughter.
100%. And I'll take it a stage further. We know from the Midrash and the Gemara that Yitro was very close with Paro, that there was an alliance between Egypt and Midian, to the extent that one of Paro's chief advisors was Yitro. Therefore, it made sense for Moshe as well, as part of the political alliance between his father-in-law and Egypt. Moshe is liable for the death penalty for killing this taskmaster. It's going to be very, very politically savvy for Moshe to marry this guy's daughter. And
especially since we remember that Egypt went all the way up to Syria.
Yeah. Okay. There are other answers. Rashi will explain, for example, that before Matan Torah, there was no prohibition of intermarriage. He will also argue that when Bnei Israel were at Har Sinai, everyone went to mikveh and all the males circumcised themselves. So at that point, everyone became proselytes. Those who weren't already Jewish included Yitro in this. But I like your suggestion. It was politically very, very clever for Moshe to marry into this family. Have a look now at source number 28. And this is the Gemara's take. And the Gemara will also explain further the comment that we've just had from the Balatorim. Leon, would you mind reading the English of the Gemara in that passage, please?
But is it so that his name was indeed Levi, but wasn't Jonathan his name, as it is stated? And Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites. Rava bar Rav Hanan said to him, and according to your reasoning, that this name was not Levi, but he was from the tribe of Levi. There is also a difficulty from that same verse. But is it so that he was the son of Manasseh? But wasn't he the son of Moses, as it is written, the sons of Moses, Gershom and Eliezer? Rava bar Rav Hanan explains the verse. Rather, although he was the son of Moses, because he acted as Manasseh, the king of Judah, who was notorious for idol worship, the verse linked him to Manasseh.
Okay, this is the crucial thing coming up now.
The verse linked him to Manasseh by calling him the son of Manasseh. Here too, in the verse from which you seek to prove that one's mother's family is called one's family, since he acted as Manasseh, who came from the tribe of Judah, acted, the verse linked him to Judah by stating that he was of the family of Judah, but he was in fact a Levite. In connection with this, Rabbi Yochanan says, in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, from here it is learned that corruption is linked to one who is corrupt, as this man was linked to Manasseh and Judah, despite having no familial connection to them.
And now the bottom line.
In connection with the story of Jonathan, son of Manasseh, the Gemara states a related statement. Rabbi Elazar says a person should always cleave to good people, meaning one should marry a woman from a good family, as this is beneficial for the offspring of that marriage.
Just what we said, yeah?
As in the case of Moses, who married a daughter of Yitro, who was a priest of idolatry, Jonathan, who was also a priest of idolatry, descended from him. While in the case of Aaron, who married the daughter of Aminadab, who was of distinguished lineage in the tribe of Judah, Pinchas descended from him.
Okay, so look at the difference between the grandchildren of Aharon, who married into a great family, the family of Yehuda, and Moshe, the grandfather of Yehonatan, who married into this terrible idol worshipping family. Okay, I think we need to move things on, because I want to get now to who this guy Micha was, and he had formed. Just before we move on to that, we find in a Sedra that we read a few weeks ago, Parashat Balak, where they are worshipping, the Bnei Israel are worshipping a Midianite god, Baal Pa'or, and Moshe tries to put a stop to the party. There's a Gemara in Sanhedrin that recounts that when Moshe instructed the judges to execute the Bnei Israel who had cohabited with the Midianite women and worshipped Baal Pa'or, Zimri, the guy who was in the center of all this Avodat Zarah, accused Moshe of hypocrisy. He said, how can you, who was married to a Midianite, accuse us of Avodat Zarah? And again, that's very, very powerful. And the Gemara there never rebuts Zimri's claim. Okay, let's move on to who this guy Micha was.
And interestingly, if I can just add something, David, to that. Interestingly, who is it that does deal with Zimri?
Pinchas, exactly.
Pinchas, the grandson of Aaron, which exactly fits in with the theory that you just spoke about before. Moshe was unable to do anything about it because he was being accused of hypocrisy. Pinchas, on the other hand, got up and dealt with it in the way that that Moshe could not.
Thank you, Johnny. Absolutely spot on. Let's just try and go through these sources explaining who Micha was. Source 1, just to set the context to source 1, it's at the end of Parashat Shemot. Moshe and Aaron have met Paro for the first time and asked to let Bnei Israel go and worship in the Midbar. And Paro's response is, A, who the hell are you? And B, who the hell is Hashem? And because you've got so much time to worry about this nonsense, you obviously haven't got enough work to do. So I'm going to make your people's lives a lot harder. What am I going to do? Whereas before I provided you lot with straw to make bricks, from now on, you're going to have to cut the straw down yourself and make bricks for them. And by the way, I'm giving you the same time to complete your work as you had before. So Moshe's first mission is a total failure. Leon, what happens?
Then Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Oh Lord, why did you bring harm upon this people? Why did you send me?
Okay, and Rashi now explains what's going on. Some of you may be familiar with this story. We find it in Rashi on the Gemara Sanhedrin, page 101. This is very much part of our Holocaust literature. We're aware of one of the reasons why we have charoset at the Seder, the mortar that the bricks were made of. Also, the blood of Jewish children that were killed by Paro and his henchmen. But there's something else as well. Nit kamach bevinyan. Look at that word and look at the third and fourth letters. We've got the first two letters of the word Micha. Leon, would you like to read that Rashi in the English, please? And you'll find out what nit kamach means.
Crushed in the building of the Egyptians, who put him into the building in the place of a brick, as is explained in the Agadah. Moshe said to the Holy One, "You have done evil to this people. Now, if they don't have bricks, they place the children of Israel into the building." The Holy One replied to him, "They are wiping out the thorns, because it is revealed before me that if these children lived, they would be completely wicked. If you want, make a test and remove one."
Wow. Okay, so Hashem's response is, don't worry. Use these Jewish babies, kill these Jewish babies, because I'm telling you, these babies will end up being no good. They'll be Risha'im. And Moshe protests. How can you do such a thing? How can you? And the response of Hashem is, I'll prove it to you. I'll let this kid live, and you see what happens to him. And this kid turns out to be Micha. Anyone come across this before? It's very, very disturbing. Okay, so let's move the story on now.
So just a thing, how is this possible? Because if all the people who went into the wilderness died over a certain age, how comes Micha survived?
Very good question. And in fact, Johnny asked a similar question from the Gemara a couple of weeks ago. We're told that Micha, despite his terrible sins, merited to get Olam Haba. Again, we have to question the validity of this Gemara, knowing that it is a midrash. We can't take it for certain. It is an idea, and the objection you raise certainly asks questions. Yeah,
I think it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be, because if it was a baby taken out, then he'd have been under 20. He wouldn't have died.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, that's point number one. Point number two is we discussed this a little bit in. Or after Paul Kuttner's share on Tisha B'Av, because we all pointed out that we all were taught that only Kalev and Yoshua were the only ones to survive on that generation, which isn't true, because Pinchas survived. Yeah. And Paul told me later on, I think he told me when I met him in shul, that actually there's evidence somewhere, I can't remember where he said now, that Pinchas' father also survived. So that which we learned, and many of us even taught, that only Yehoshua and Caleb survived of that generation, is not actually strictly true. And I think that what we probably have to say is only those who followed Yehoshua and Caleb's example and didn't get involved in the crying and with the other spies survived. And that would actually make more sense, because why it wouldn't be fair, and we can't say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not fair. It wouldn't be fair for those people who didn't follow the 10 spies, so those people who followed Caleb and Yehoshua, to suffer the same punishment as those who did follow the 10 spies. So I think that we have to perhaps qualify the idea that we were all taught that only Kalev and Yeshua survived from that generation, because clearly it's not actually true in physical terms. But you're right that if Micha was a baby, he would have been under 20 and he would not have been subject to the decree of dying in the wilderness.
Okay.
Before you go on, David, Paul, have you still got your hand up?
The daughter of Asher also survived and went into Israel.
So who?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's continue the story. We're now leaving Mitzrayim. The 10th plague has just occurred. The people are starting traveling out of Mitzrayim towards Yam Suf. And Moshe busies himself with something that was a promise from a previous generation, to find Atzmot Yosef. So whilst everyone else is busy leaving Mitzrayim, Moshe goes to look for Yosef's coffin. We know he was put in a coffin because that's how the book of Bereshit ends, Vayisem Ba'aron b'Mitzrayim. And according to the Midrash, his coffin was actually suspended in the Nile by the Mitzrim. They thought it was good for fertility. So Moshe finds Atzmot Yosef in the Nile, and he davens for this coffin to be raised up from the Nile, and he casts a plate, a golden plate, on top of this coffin, and then takes Yosef out of Egypt and has fulfilled the commandment of Yosef to his children before he died. So just park this a minute, this golden plate on the top of Yosef's coffin. Now we're getting to the Red Sea, and look at source number 4. We're leaving source number 3 for the moment. Leon?
The Lord stiffened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he gave chase to the Israelites, as the Israelites were departing defiantly.
Okay, we're all very, very familiar with this pasuk. Yotzeim biyad Ramah. They are defiant. And the Balatorim there uses an expression. First of all, he says that biyad Ramah occurs 3 times in the Tanakh, here and twice else in Sefer B'Midbar, both with the context of Avodat Zarah. And you'll see the words there, Melamed shepesel Micha ava imahem, that the idol of Micha went into the Red Sea with Bnei Israel. K'moshe darshu, as we find in a pasuk in Zechariah, v'avar bayam Sarah. And here the word Sarah means Soros. Soros went into the water with them. Just park that for a minute and now look at source number 6.
But the Israelites had marched through the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left.
Okay, we're very familiar with this pasuk. We sing it to a special tune. But how many times does this pasuk occur in the story of the Shira?
Twice.
Twice. This is the second occasion it's used. And look at the word choma. It's written defectively. Ketiv chaser. Okay? And if we retranslate it without the vav, it's chema. Anger. Why? Because God was angry with them, al peser Micha, she'avai mahem bayam. He was angry with Bnei Israel at the time because they took this pesel with them. V'hainu dichtiv yava bayam tzara, what we just saw in connection with the previous verse. And if you look at the letters of Ramah that we had in the previous pasuk, okay, and back down, Johnny, to number 7. If you take the word Ramah, the final letters of the words V'avar bayam tzara, which is the illusion of Ramah, you'll get the gematria, Reish Mem Hey, is equal to the words Pesel Micha. Okay, it's not very scientific. It's very drastic.
It's worse than that, David, because we actually read that he made the idols when his mother gave him the money, which is when they're already in Israel, much later on.
Okay, this isn't the same idol. This is another idol. And this guy, as I said to you before, the guy's got form. Okay. Where do we find the idol next? In passage 3. And this is the story of the Egel Masecha, the golden calf. And Leon, if you just want to read the Rashi there on the pasuk that Amram made the Egel Masecha.
As soon as he, Aaron, had thrown it, the gold, into the fire in a melting pot, the magicians amongst the mixed multitude who had come up with them from Egypt came and made it, the golden calf, by their magic art. There are some who say that Micha, the idolater, mentioned in Judges chapter 17, was there, who had been drawn forth from the foundations of a building in Egypt, where he was nearly crushed. He had in his possession a supernatural name, Shem, and a plate upon which Moses had written, "Come up, ox, come up, ox," in order to raise the coffin of Joseph, who is compared to an ox. Compare Deuteronomy 33:17, out of the Nile. And he cast it, the plate, into the melting pot, and the calf, the young ox, came out. Midrash Tanchuma, Ki Tisa.
Okay, so according to this opinion, Micha contributed to the Egel Hazahav. Okay, I recognise I've been going on for over an hour now, and unfortunately I still haven't got to the end of the first part of the presentation. I'll leave it entirely up to you. I've got about another 3 or 4 sources dealing with Micha and the Avodat Zarah in the Midbar. I can either do it now or we can leave it for another time or whatever. Johnny, can I leave it down?
I'd like to wrap it up today if we can, so that we can start the next chapter next week. So carry on.
Well, for me to wrap the whole thing up is going to be impossible. I can certainly wrap up the first part of it.
Okay, let's do that, and then we'll decide what to do next.
Yeah, we can always leave it for another year, whatever. Okay, we're now on to source number 8, and this I've referred to, and John is referred to in the shir as well. So in the Torah, we find in the 2nd chapter of the Midbar the formations of the camps in the Midbar when they encamped. And you had 3 tribes at each side, north, south, east and west. And in the middle was the tribe of Levi. And the Mefarshim say that this is a remez to where the particular tribes would inherit property in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, Leon?
On the north, the standard of the division of Dan, troop by troop. Chieftain of the Danites, Ahiezer, son of Ammishaddai.
Okay, and the last pasuk in that particular section, which is source number 9.
The total enrolled in the division of Dan, 157,600. These shall march last by their standards.
Okay, and I've highlighted 2 words there, Safona, which is the indication of the territory that they eventually conquer, albeit very, very violently and in a way that was totally inappropriate and against halacha, as Johnny described last week. And secondly, that they were at the back. Now, if you remember something Johnny described last week or the week before, that they put the women and the children at the front when they were marching north. Here they're at the back, and there's significance. Also in the parasha of Balatorim, which I haven't brought here, the terminology is used that Dan is me'asef l'chol ha'machanot. They pick up all the stragglers at the back. So now let's have a look at what the Balatorim says about La'acharona. It says La'acharona is found twice in Tanakh. Here and in a pasuk from Kohelet, which says Lo yeh lahem zikaron im sheyiyu la'acharona. This pasuk is interpreted by the Mefarshim as referring to Amalek. Amalek haya mesares shevet Dan ba'avon pesel Micha she'imahem. Amalek were mesares shevet Dan, who were at the back because of their involvement in pesel Micha. And what's the zikaron that's referred to in this pasuk in Kohelet? If you take the word Yihiyeh lahem zikaron and take the last letters, Sofei Tevot, of the word Yihiyeh lahem zikaron, what do you get?
Hey, Mem, Nun.
Yeah.
Haman.
Might be Haman.
Yeah, Haman.
Who was descended from
Amalek.
Amalek. And here now is the stuff coming up for those who have not of a nervous disposition. They should switch off now. What does the word Mesares mean? Anyone?
Castrate.
Thank you. Who said that? Okay. They castrated, according to this midrash. Look at number 11. We're all very, very familiar with this. Leon?
Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. How, undeterred by the fear of God, he surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary and cut down all the stragglers in your rear.
Okay, look at the word Vayizanev. Okay, Zanav. What's Zanav? We've had this in the shir.
Tail.
Yeah, tail. So have a look now at the Rashi on this pasuk, verse 12. Leon?
Vayaznav Becha means smiting the membrum. He cut off the membra and threw them up provocatively toward heaven, God, as in the Midrash, Tanchuma, Kitetse, Kol Hanachashalim Acharecha, and he smote the hindmost of thee, even those that were feeble behind thee. that is, those who were enfeebled because of their sins, and whom the clouds had expelled from the protection they afforded.
Okay, so even the Rashi said, this is what happened to Shevet Dan, who were at the back and were attacked by Amalek at the back. They were castrated by Yizaneh Becha. Kol HaNecheshalim Acharecha, those the hindmost. Now look at the Balatorim, which is really disturbing. Asher, just up a bit. Asher Karacha Baderech. Karacha, who met you in the wilderness, or who called you down.
Excuse me, David, I have to leave.
Okay.
I have to leave. Medical matters.
Okay, thank you very much, Leona. I'm just finishing here anyway.
Yeah, okay.
But thank you for reading for us. Okay, says the Balatorim, Karacha b'gematria seiras. If you take the numerical value of the word karacha, it's equal to castration. So says the Balatorim, this is the proof that this is what happened to them as a result of their idol worship. Vayizanev b'cha b'gematria zeh milah. If you take the gematria of the word vayizanev b'cha, it's equal to zeh milah. Kol HaNecheshalim Acharecha b'gematria zeh haya shivto shel dam. This is equal to, this is the tribe of Dan. It's all very, very midrashic. Again, it's totally non-scientific. It's purely an illusion. But we now have this connection between Shevet Dan, Micha, and Milah. And what I was going to bring out further was the story that Johnny went through last week. What happens at the inn with the Milah? Who's threatening to kill who? Why did Zipporah take the stone and circumcise her son? Which son was it? Was it Gershom or was it Eliezer? Why does the Torah refer to Banav when we're only given an account of one at the time? But there's definitely a connection. And what I'm going to prove in the sources that are coming is that this deal that Moshe made with Yitro, that he came to regret, was not only that the firstborn would follow the father-in-law's religion, but also that that firstborn would not have Brit Milah. Any children born thereafter would have Brit Milah. Therefore, the pshat of what happened at the inn was Zipporah saw the outcome of this deal that her father had made with Moshe, and she couldn't go through with that deal. Therefore, because her child's life was threatened, or her husband's life was threatened, whichever way you want to interpret it, and that's a further discussion, a further share, she decides to do Brit Milah on her son. I'll leave you with one further thought. The story right at the beginning, which Johnny referred to last week, of the beginning of Parashat Yitro, whether it occurred before Matan Torah or after Matan Torah, the commentators discuss that. And we have the whole story that Johnny presented beautifully last week, that Moshe sees his wife and children for the first time since Yetziat Mitzrayim, since the story at the inn. And what does Moshe do? He doesn't greet his wife. He doesn't greet his children. What does he do instead? Go and have a coffee with Yitro. And this is the proof, according to Johnny's sources, that Moshe ends up having a grandchild that goes completely off the rails. Why? Because he's too involved in affairs of state. The following passages that I've got are going to prove something different, but I'm going to end with something to really disturb you. The parasha of Yitro is preceded immediately by what?
Kirat Hayam.
After. In the same parasha, yes. What's the very last story in the Sefer of Beshalach?
I'm not as good as you. I'll have to look it up.
Purim morning, Johnny. Laning for
Oh,
Purim.
the story of Amalek. Yes.
Amalek.
Moshe with his hands up.
Moshe with his hands up. And what are they told right at the end of the story? Get rid of Amalek because of what they did to you, which is repeated at the end of Sefer Devarim in Ki Tetzei. And what did they do to us? Brit Milah. That they castrated the Brit Milah. Not only that, they threw the foreskins into the air, according to Rashi. There's definitely a connection here between the fact that this is how they punish Shevet Dan because of their Avodat Zarah, and it's also a punishment on Moshe Rabbeinu because he enters into this covenant with Yitro not to circumcise the firstborn child.
Wow. Thank you, David. That's there's a huge amount in there. I was hoping that we could close this story today, but I think there's too much in there that we need to discuss. We have gone on, so I think we'll close it here. I think we'll close it here for today. But I think I certainly would like to cogitate on that and then open it up for a discussion at the beginning of the next year, and let's see how far we go. The truth is, there's no reason why we have to get on to the next chapter right away. I'm just anxious to tell you all about the concubine at Giva and a civil war, but it can wait for another week or two. So
not only that, Johnny, it sets you up nicely from one story of depravity to another.
Which is exactly why the Mefarshim say that these two stories are after one another, after Shimshon, to demonstrate the degradation of the people at that time. So yes, it does set it up nicely. So we'll call it a day for today now, and then next week we will finish off David's presentation and open it up for everybody's discussion and thoughts. I've certainly got a lot to think about there. It's a huge amount of stuff, and I'd like to say that David's presentation is very much supported by what you would call mainstream sources. Nobody can argue with Rashi. Well, you can if you want, but I mean, nobody really can argue with Rashi. Balatorim. These are first division sources. Some of the stuff that I put in front of you is my own nonsense, but David has presented to you shocking stuff, really, supported by quotes from very, very powerful sources, and I think it needs thinking about, it needs discussing, and I'm sure that many of you will want to think what we can draw out of this, because there's no point really going through it just for the sake of sticking the boot in. We have to take something from it for ourselves, and we'll discuss that next week. So David, thank you very much for that. I, for one, have got lots and lots to think about. This will be put up, the link will be put up so that if you want to hear it all again and look at the sources again, it will be available later on today once the recording is dealt with.
Thank you very much, David. Very enjoyable.
Thank you,
Baruch, very good. Excellent.
Thank you, David. Johnny Helpham.
Thank you, James.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you.
Lots of good work.
Excellent presentation. Thank you. Thank you, David.
Absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Johnny.
Yes, Johnny.
I think Phil Feingold would have enjoyed that.
I think he would have enjoyed the gematrias. I'm not sure he would have enjoyed some of the...
Talking about the gematrias.
Yeah, he'd have loved the gematrias. He could have told you them all himself anyway.
Absolutely. Very good. Today about...
Fascinating. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you. Shavua Tov.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tonight, 8:30, Daniel Moore will be talking about emerging communities in Africa, in South America, all sorts of really interesting stuff about people who want to be Jews if they're not already Jews. Why they would want to be Jews is beyond me. But anyway, there you are. He'll tell you all about it. 8:30 tonight. And before that, the Kabbalah share with Shelley at 5 o'clock. I'll send out a link for that shortly as well.
Johnny, who did the graphics for your artwork?
These graphics up here.
Yeah.
My daughter did some of them, and some of them were done by Ravi Doe's, one of Ravi Doe's connections.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's beautiful.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, David.
Bye, everyone. Shavua Tov.